Well, good morning, everybody. Say good morning with tongue in cheek. It's morning, not necessarily good. But it is nice to see you all here. And on behalf of Howard and Sue Wilson and the Wilson family, it's a pleasure to welcome you to commemorate at least the first part. It is going to be commemorated for quite a long time to come. But the life of Margaret Primrose Gray. A famous poet by the name of Edward Fitzgerald said, "Our love, could thou and I with fate conspire, would we not grasp this sorry scheme of things entire, dash it to pieces, and rebuild it closer to our heart's desire?" That's how we feel on occasions like this, when someone that we have loved dearly passes away. And like you, I hoped I'd never see this day. But sadly, the inevitability of life in this system has caught up with all of us, but obviously and more profoundly with our dear Margaret. Along with all of you, we sorrow for the loss of someone who we all, for many and varied reasons, loved very dearly. Margaret Gray was a woman of great substance, and to have had a friendship with her was a gift that enriched anyone and everyone who knew her. Principally, as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, Margaret's record stands as a monument to integrity and loyalty to our great God Jehovah, and as touched and saddened by her passing as we all are, Jehovah also keenly feels the loss. In the book of Job, he says that he will show a longing to see again the work of his hands. And we look forward to that time when Margaret will be back with us, not as a frail, elderly lady, but as the vibrant and beautiful woman that her photographs show she surely was. On many occasions, I had the pleasure of working along with Margaret in the witnessing work that we do as Jehovah's Witnesses, and I was always in awe of her intelligence. She always laughed at my jokes. On one particular day, I saw a photograph of her in her house when she was young, somewhat like this, and I remarked what a darn good sort she was. But you know, she looked at the photograph and I could see she was a little miffed by the fact that so much time had gone past and she didn't look like the photograph so much anymore. But I looked at it and I said to her, "Margaret, you know, there's no such thing as old ladies. They're just antique little girls." And I got a little laugh out of her. I must admit that if Margaret had been any tougher, she would have rusted. We have seen the times when she was on the brink, but from the brink and from the ashes like a phoenix, she rose back up and kept fighting. And that was the nature of Margaret. You know, one hot afternoon, Margaret and I were out in field service and doing the legion of return visits that she had. But as Margaret was talking at the door, I could see her start to sway and her legs wobble a little bit. Well, all of a sudden, she just dropped. And I scooped her up in my arms. And I said, "Don't worry, I've got you." And she looked at me, half dazed, and says, "You've got me? Who's got you?" I kid you not, I carried her to my car. It was about 50 metres away, and it nearly killed me, but I felt like Superman. When I came back to see her again a couple of days later, I gave her the bill for the hernia operation, and she smiled and said, "Give it to Howard." Seriously, Margaret was irrepressible. Within days, as I said, she was back doing what she just loved to do. And as Margaret got older, things naturally became a lot more difficult for her. But she never, ever lost her sense of humour. In fact, she believed that the worst bankrupt in the world is a man or a woman that has lost their sense of humour. One day, I knocked at her door and I gave her the usual greeting, "Good morning, Miss Daisy. because it was always like driving Miss Daisy. Anyway, I got a little giggle out of her, and as we drove along in the car, she piped up, "Oh, Stuart, do you know I'm 83 today?" I screeched the car to a standstill and looked at her and said, "You liar! You told me you were 21. I'm not going out with you anymore." She laughed her head off. She was a very feminine lady, as I'm sure you'll agree, and it's sad that amongst women today, femininity is not esteemed as the virtue that it once was. And among the myriad qualities that Margaret had was the fact that she was a real lady. One day I got a call from Catherine to quickly come round to Margaret's house in Sunnybank Hills. She'd collapsed in the garden, and it was pretty distressing to see this person that you love on the ground. But you know, it was equally remarkable to see her rise from the thorns of that rose bush, dust herself off, and regain the posture of the regal lady that Margaret Gray was. Just prior to the passing of Joe, her husband, whom we all loved very much, she rang one evening and asked if we would quickly go up to the hospital to try and help settle him down. He was fairly distressed. So I thought, what would settle Joe down? I thought, I know. So we raced in, grabbed some nice crystal glasses, filled them up with ice. I stuffed a bottle of scotch under my arm, and we marched off to the hospital. Well, it did the trick. Joe absolutely loved it. In fact, he was very impressed, so I got some points there. The warder was even more impressed. He wondered what was going on, the smell of whiskey in this hospital. It wasn't quite usual. It was normally ether. You don't get quite the same effect when you drink that. But nonetheless, Joe was happy. And to see Joe look at me and smile and say, "Happy days," that was reward enough. Margaret was always a gracious lady, and to do things for Margaret was an absolute and profound pleasure. And to have seen how much Joe and Margaret loved each other was an absolute witness to the fact that a happy marriage is a precious and joyous thing. Somebody once said that there is no greater gift that a man can give to his children than to love their mother. And surely Joe loved Margaret and Margaret loved Joe. And in turn, Margaret Gray's gift to us and her children was that she was an example in life, an example of patience in adversity, her loyalty, her generosity, her intelligence, and supremely her faithfulness to our God, Jehovah. Indeed, at this present time, Margaret has laid down to rest. But as the book of Daniel shows, when Jehovah was speaking to his servant, his faithful servant Daniel, he said that he would sleep, but he would rise and he would get his reward and stand up for his lot at the end of the days. Our dear Margaret will indeed stand up for her lot at the end of the days, along with millions of people who now sleep in the grave. They will rise to a resurrection of life, and our dear friend Margaret will rise to the real life. She had a scripture that I enjoyed sharing with her, and she appreciated it very much. And it sums, in my opinion, Margaret up very ably. In the book of Job, chapter 23, verse 10, he says, "But he knows the path I have taken. After he has tested me, I will come out as pure gold." Our dear Margaret Primrose Gray was an example of what real gold is. And we look forward to seeing her young, sprightly, fresh as a daisy, enjoying life in the new system along with all of us. And we pray that that time will come very soon, that she will not sleep for long, but that soon Jehovah will see fit to grant her an early resurrection. Now, friends, I'm going to introduce you to Simon Wilson. Oh, he's just asked me not to steal his notes. That would be a disaster. So I'll call Simon to the platform.
Thank you, Stuart. All right, this is always tough, but bear with me. I have a great privilege this morning, and that's to be able to stand up here and talk to you all here and on Skype around the world about this wonderful lady that was my grandmother, that was maybe your sister, your mother, physical sister, spiritual sister, in many ways a physical mother, spiritual mother to many, grandmother, friend, aunt, wife. She was known and loved by so many. My grandma, Margaret Gray. The photograph that you see at the top here is how I remember my grandma as a young person. That's what she was to me. And as children, when you grow up in a family with grandparents, you don't question who they are or how they got there. They're just there. You never stop to think about their backstory and what's brought them to where you are in life. All through my growing up, I remember visiting their home at 11 Whitelands Avenue in Chorleywood in the UK. Grandad would be the handy one with the tools or in the garden. Grandma would be the one with dressmaking patterns or her Berta magazines or running away on her Bible studies or telling Grandad not to put so much jam on his bread. I grew up. I had kids of my own, and we get the next picture. And my grandparents were always there to encourage me. That photograph was taken in 1995, and Grandma loved babies, didn't she? I think we all know Grandma loved babies. Old age came creeping along, though, and Grandad had his leg amputated, and it got a bit harder for him. The next photo we see taken was in 2008, and many of you here will remember this one. This was at their 60th wedding anniversary celebration. But as he deteriorated through the 2000s and late 2000s, it became apparent that my granddad wouldn't be there for much longer. And as most of you know, we lost my granddad, Joseph William Gray, in 2009. He was 92. In the 6 years after, Grandma's health was up and down a bit, and we see a photograph here that's a fairly recent one. That's just taken a few months ago, in 2014. And she, as Stuart mentioned, Margaret Primrose Gray, and as we know, she finally fell asleep last Monday on the 16th of February. And now neither of my grandparents are there. For now, as Stuart said, we have that hope, don't we, for now. But in thinking about what to talk about today, what I wanted to do was share with you guys some of the things that I've learned about my grandma in recent years that perhaps no one will know, because she had a truly amazing life. This is not a whole of life history. We don't have the hours to be able to do that justice. Just some snapshots of a full and fulfilled life. Nor is it a talk about her hope and faith. Stuart's mentioned that, and next week we have the memorial service at the Kingdom Hall, where Brother Andrew Mann will do a great job of that. These might be things that many here are unaware of about Grandma's history, and I hope they might help you to smile and perhaps remember my grandma in a little bit of a different light than what we do now. Margaret Primrose Onus was born in 1926, the second of 4 children, as Aussie as they come. Family history in farming, gold mining, and growing up learning to ride horses. Later living with her mum and her siblings at Berowra in Sydney, she went to school at Hornsby High School, which was the last one. That's right, we skipped past that. That's okay. So we had the picture of Grandma at school. She left Hornsby High School in 1941 and returned to northern New South Wales. And the picture we see here is about that time. She spent some time teaching a local family, and she'd ride there either on her bike or on a horse and spend the week with the family and then come home on the weekends. Somewhere about this time, Grandma's mother learns about Jehovah's Witnesses, and if we can get the next one. and the seeds are sown for Margaret too. This photograph is my grandma on the left, her mother on the right, and brother Norman Bellotti in the middle at Inverell. And so this would have been 1944, 1945, sometime around there. Grandma returned to Sydney after spending some time teaching the local family and became a swimming and tennis teacher at Asham Girls' School. And it was whilst in Sydney that she met this man. September 1945, my granddad, just flown in from England. He'd spent 55 hours on a plane, a Royal Naval officer, and met at a tennis party. He was very quickly attracted to Margaret. He had a bit of a soft spot for attractive, sporty brunettes, and blondes too, probably, knowing Grandad. And he's soon sending her flowers and gifts. Grandma's telling him not to waste his money, but he continued. It's rather amusing to read Grandad's description of Margaret in a letter to her, including the following comments. And I'm not going to read them all, but these were just so funny. Well now, here's to set out your character. 1, definitely not scientific. 1 further down, not a great coordinator, a little obstinate at times, not appreciative of mathematical precision. They were most amusing. Not meticulous. In fact, and I can't read his writing here on some of these, but so very amusing anyway, as we see Grandad describing mentally energetic, but not apt to jump at things. It was a little bit different, isn't it, the way they described things back then. In the words of Grandad at that time, he said, I courted Margaret actively and we used to go to Romano's nightclub. But within only a few months, Margaret made clear to Joe that she didn't want to leave Australia and that there really could be no future in their relationship. I'd like to be able to say at this point that he was heartbroken, but his memoirs just say that his courtship came to an end. Their courtship came to an end. He sailed to Hong Kong in early 1946, and not long after that he was engaged to Betty. He sails back into Margaret's life in the not too distant future after that. Also about this time, if we can get the next one, thanks, Grandma decides that teaching is not for her anymore. And in August 1946, she starts a preliminary course to become a nurse at Royal Prince Alfred Hospital in Sydney. Margaret also moves on to other relationships, and it's the ending of one of these, we think, that prompted Margaret to rethink the young British naval officer. And in February 1947, they communicate again via letter, via phone and via telegram. We're fortunate enough to have some of those letters and telegrams. Margaret agrees to marry Joe and to move to England with him. In her own words, from a letter to him in 1947, simply had to write to you again, as ever since I wrote the other letter to you, I've been thinking out ways and means of how I can marry you. That is, if you still want to marry me. And I don't dare think that you won't, in case it may put the idea into your head. My granddad's response, you must, underlined, no, I would love to marry you. I have always wanted to, and I'm sure I always shall. This telegram, it's probably a little difficult for you to read, but it's a telegram from Grandma to Joe in Hong Kong. So Grandma was in Sydney, so this was March 1947. The telegram just simply says, we'll try to be patient, my love, Margaret. In July 1947, they are formally engaged. This photograph was taken the day that Grandad organised for the engagement ring to be put onto Grandma's finger. He had 2 friends organise that for him in Sydney. And you can see she's absolutely thrilled. We've got letters from all of them around that period, the 2 friends from Grandma and from Grandad, and they all talk about what a wonderful day that was. They went and celebrated with Pims. It takes until 1948, though, before Joe's job and Margaret's situation is aligned and they marry in Hong Kong. And this is one of the photographs we have from them there. Grandma made her own dress that you see there, so it was a beautiful dress. And they settle into temporary life in Hong Kong. We've got some photographs here taken from that period in Hong Kong in their flat, in their accommodation in Hong Kong. And just over 9 months later, literally just over 9 months later, Margaret is born. And we've got some beautiful photographs here of Margaret. In August 1949, they leave for England. By the time they get to England, apparently they were thoroughly sick of the journey, even though it was first class on P&O. Before 1950 is out, Grandma, though, is actively and regularly studying with Jehovah's Witnesses, convinced that she has now found the truth. Grandad is horrified. His memoirs tell us, when the witnesses were about, I used to climb the nearest fruit tree and stay there till they'd gone. This, though, was taken about that time. So as you can see by now, my mum, Susan's, joined Margaret. And not long after that, Annette Louise joins the family as well. Got the next one there. Grandma's baptism in 1951 led to some stresses and strains in their marriage, as Grandma, as we all know, single-mindedly forged ahead with what she was doing in the truth. But they worked through all of those strains, and eventually Grandad also joined Margaret in the truth, and that was in 1954 when he got baptised. This photograph was taken, we think, sometime in the early 1960s, and we see Grandma, we think, at an assembly, doing a demonstration. So again, that takes us back. Hey. The rest, as they say, is history. Aged 88, baptised for 64 years. My grandma had a life of full-time service as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and she certainly helped many, and there's no question that she was loved by many. This photo was taken, when did we get these families? About a year ago. A bit longer than that, 6 months ago. And it was wonderful being there with all of us together and having these photos taken. So with 3 daughters, Margaret, Sue and Annie, 6 grandchildren, Simon, Debbie, Alice, Annie, Andrew, Joe, great-grandchildren, 10 of them, Dominic, Benjamin, Karina, Elam, Liam, Connor, Ella, Olivia, Elliot, Jesse and Kira, plus sons-in-law, grandchildren-in-law, step-grandchildren, step-great-grandchildren. She will be missed. You know, she was actually this close to having a step-great-great-grandchild. So very, very close to being that another generation again. You know, all through their courtship, as we've privileged to read from their letters, my granddad used to close his letters with this sign-off, and this is beautiful. He used to close his letters, God bless you and keep you safe and happy, now and always. All my love, now and ever. Joe. We now pray similar for Jehovah God to keep her safe and happy, now and always. And we know that she will always have all our love, now and ever. She's not there anymore for us, is she? We know that. But we know that she soon will be. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. That was beautiful and it was touching. And eloquence is certainly a trait that runs in your entire family. Well, friends, it's a pleasure now just to conclude by singing a song together. Margaret always loved the beautiful melodies that Jehovah's organisation had put out, and you could always hear her singing at the Kingdom Hall regardless of how she felt. So we're going to conclude with a song that embodies the hope that we have as Jehovah's people, that hope of a resurrection in the very near future. The sentiments are drawn from the book of Job, that Jehovah God will call again for the work of his hands so that he can enjoy it, and those whom he calls can enjoy it for eternity. So let's sing together, if you're able, song number 111. Ooh. Technical hit. I don't know that I can. It does. Just a day and disappears tomorrow. All that we are can quickly fade away, replaced with tears and sorrow. If a man should die, can he live again? Hear the promise God has made. He will call, the dead will answer. They shall live at his command, for he will have a longing for the work of his own hand. So have faith and do not wonder, for our God can make a stand, and we shall live forever as the work of his own hand. Friends of our God, though they may pass away, will never be forsaken. All those who sleep in God's memory stay, from death he will awaken. Then will come to see all that life can be, paradise eternally. He will call, the dead will answer. They shall live at his command, for he will have a longing for the work of his own hand. So have faith and do not wonder, for our God can make a stand, and we shall live forever as the work of his own hand.